Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
And it's Jeremy from Tested.
Welcome to Projections, our weekly show where we talk about all things VR and AR. And this week we're reviewing a high-profile game.
One that a lot of them have probably already played.
Yes.
If they're as into VR as we are.
Yeah.
Doom VFR.
What does the FR stand for?
You know what the F stands for.
I think I know what it is.
So this is the first ground-up VR title from Bethesda.
Yes.
They released three, in very close proximity.
Skyrim, Fallout 4,
exactly.
and Doom VFR. It's based on the most recent reboot of Doom, which was for consoles and PC, a flat-screen game.
There is some confusion there. I think a lot of people expected it to be that game converted it to VR, but it's not. It's a ground-up, using some of the same assets, a ground-up rethinking of what that game might be like, in a shorter, more condensed VR experience.
Same enemies, same NPCs. You're still on the same location. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. So we had high expectations for this game. One, because Bethesda owning Doom, and Doom being one of the first games that got us interested in this version of VR, modern VR. At least the port of Doom.
Absolutely. I mean, Doom was the game that Carmack had at E3 so many years ago,
yes,
with literally a duct tape headset that he had gotten from Palmer, and it sort of became the thing that kickstarted the Kickstarter.
Right, and obviously, even though he's not working at Bethesda and didn't work on this version of Doom, you would think some of the lessons we've now several years into tracked VR with motion controls, we would get, this is a holy grail.
Well, and it is id. I mean, this is a first-party id title. Yeah. Id has a great track record.
So let's first talk about how the game plays. So this is it's still a full game. It's $30, around 5 to 6 hours of content, and you're running around and using all the weapons you're familiar with Doom and shooting all the demons that you're familiar with in Doom.
Well, okay. Yes, no, that's true.
Yep.
But how are you moving around?
Yes, the locomotion mechanic. The primary way to move around is teleportation.
It's a Vive game, so it's made for these controllers. And in fact, when it came out on the PC, it didn't even work on the Rift. It just required a small patch, a workaround, if you will, on the part of Valve in order to get Steam VR compatible with the Rift and Doom. So it now works on the Rift, but it was clearly designed for these controllers.
Yes, and on the Vive, these controllers, you have two trackpads. You have your motion controls. You basically have your both hands represented in the game. Your right hand is going to be for your main weapon, and your left hand is for grenades. You're throwing grenades. And then the trackpad on the left hand is teleport. So you have your standard arcing teleport mechanic, which also works as a temporal slowdown, your bullet time.
Right.
As you're teleporting, time slows down, and which is a perk you can upgrade, and use that instead of circle strafing.
Right. So if you tap in any direction, you do this momentary blink, this dash through space.
Yeah.
And if you press and you actually click into the pad, that's when you bring up the teleport arc. And it sends the arc in one direction. You let go, and you suddenly teleport to that place.
I know a lot of people complain about not having a smooth locomotion mechanic, which we've seen in many shooters, many of these RPGs, even in VR, and that would mean holding one direction on the trackpad and letting your body strafe in that direction.
So they didn't enable that. They don't even allow that. It's not an option. It's not an advanced, you have to unlock it option. It's just not even there.
Users have since modded and enabled that option.
That's true, but why do you think they didn't include that?
I think purely for comfort. They wanted to design this as a wide release, right? And it's a single-player game, so having smooth locomotion makes a lot of sense if you're doing a multiplayer game because you can't cheat by teleporting.
Right.
But I think they designed the combat scenarios and even the level design around the idea of teleporting, which also is tied into their telefragging mechanic, but also dashing, because I think the dash is the key. The dash is what makes this feel like a visceral Doom shooter.
You can almost use the dash in some cases as a smooth locomotion because there's no cooldown.
Right.
You can just continually tap forward, and as long as you're in an exploration phase of the game where there's not a whole lot of enemies around, you can clearly walk down corridors comfortably. And then you physically turn. This is another Vive-only
room scale, 360.
Telltale sign.
Yep.
There's no rotation ability in the game, so you can't plant your feet forward. Now, am I the only one who plays on Vive and still wants that?
I do too. I love room scale for a lot of reasons, and especially good in near field scenarios where I'm getting close up to objects. Walking up to a counter or a table, and I want to walk around. But if I'm moving fast, I actually want to plant my feet and be able to use, and my brain wants to use only my thumbs or a stick to move around. because I don't think as big of room scale as you could have, doing a dash plus physically moving your body around, I don't think that's comfortable.
I just purely mean the snap rotation, because I feel like the wire entanglement that I get affected by playing in room scale is like, I'd rather just avoid that entirely sometimes and just plant my feet forward and snap rotate with one of the controllers. Maybe I'm also just used to that from playing a lot on Rift. I don't know. But when I do play on Vive now, it's almost like it's sort of a pain when I get to a point and I want to go left. I instinctively just want to turn with a button, and that should be an option, people, even on Vive games. I get the appeal of 360 room scale is available to every Vive user, and that's cool for some things like, Job Simulator or an environment where you're moving around in a but in Doom, I just sometimes just want to snap rotate. I
think they could have compensated for some of that with level design. If they made the tunneling so it's indoor and outdoor, space environments, right, on surfaces, Mars surfaces. But like, if they design the corridors where you're mostly facing forward and enemies are mostly generally coming from this 180 direction in front of you, then I wouldn't mind not having the snap mechanic, the turn mechanic, and just being tethered. But they don't do that. They design it I think they designed it as if it was just a Doom game, and you have a lot of like Y intersections, T intersections at corridors, enemies coming at you from both front and behind, where you're going to have to fully turn around, and then you do get caught up if you're not, if you're not playing in a big open space where you can't get entangled.
Yeah, but then you have the flexibility of teleportation. That seems like you can't do one and say you must do real world rotation, but you can also teleport. That just seems like they're breaking the rules of what would be considered a Doom game with the teleportation. I mean, if I can teleport behind a guy and then immediately turn around and shoot at him, I mean, that doesn't feel like Doom. That's a different kind of experience than what I would have expected going into it. And I'm not sure that I entirely like that.
Yeah, and especially with the corridor design, right? If you're walking through a corridor, which I think they may feel a little wider than in the flat screen Doom, but I often found myself bumping up against the wall, and a teleport wasn't even comfortable enough where I would felt like I was doing like in Robo Recall, for example, where the streets are really wide. I had a great time kind of teleporting around enemies and shooting them from all sides, using teleportation as a way to circle strafe. When I'm in a corridor, I was teleporting really close up to enemies, and then like, oh no, and there's no like real good melee action. And so it felt claustrophobic that way.
So you mentioned the telefrag mechanic. What do you think of that as compared to the 2D version?
Yeah, so the flat screen version had, I thought, a really satisfying like glory kill mechanic. Enemies, when you got them down, even like big bosses, when you got them down to a certain health level, they would start shimmering, and you could click this action which would warp you into them. They'd explode, and it'd be a great way to get health and ammo.
They call that a push forward shooter, mechanic. They want you constantly pushing into the battle.
Yes. I think the telefrag is a good analog, but I don't think it feels that great. Like maybe some of the animation wasn't there. It didn't really feel like, because they couldn't slow time down as you're telefragging. You basically, once you teleport, that's it. You're there, right? It's teleportation. They don't play the full animation of the flat screen game. But once I telefragged them, like it wasn't maybe gory enough. It just didn't feel as satisfying to me.
I don't know. It took me a minute to even understand how it worked, because normally when you teleport, you aim at the ground, and you have this arc, and it aims to the ground. Once you're telefragging something, you actually aim at the body, and it makes a nice sound, and I started to understand that. That's fine. And I ended up liking it, but not so much for the impact of the glory kill, but because it ended the battle. Like I was playing on easy. I don't know, did you play on
one
medium
step
level?
Above easy?
I played on the easy mode, and I consider myself a pretty good first-person shooter player. I still died several times.
It's not an easy game.
I didn't expect that. And so a lot of these enemies, they just take a ton of damage, and they're constantly running at you, and you're teleporting away. And I know that might sound fun, but to me it was just like I didn't feel it like I was getting a great sense of a loop that is a mechanic, of battle that I felt good about. And so when they would finally just die, that's a great feeling. And I just was done with that battle, so I enjoyed the telefrag from that aspect. Especially when I was running low on ammo for some reason, even when playing on easy. Getting a telefrag in there is a nice way to end the battle a little bit early.
And I think that speaks to some of the animation design. I don't think the animations are spawned that well to being shot at. Like the guns don't have a really nice feel. Maybe it's because we're playing it in VR, where if I'm holding a machine gun, like you can't get real recoil, right? But like it just feels, everything feels light and empty. right?
That's a problem with weapons in VR, isn't it?
Yeah, but I would expect if you're, like, you get a great benefit of aiming, holding the gun and actually doing aiming.
Right.
I felt great, but we've had that in so many VR games.
Yeah.
What does Doom bring to the table? And it felt hollow. A lot of the combat encounters. Now,
Yeah.
I did feel like it was visceral. Like I'm sweating after because I'm like bracing my feet, and there are lots of enemies running at me, and I'm using the dash mechanic more often than teleport when I'm in combat, because I felt like that was a really good way to simulate like the circle strafing that I'm used to in like a Doom or a Quake.
Yeah, right. I wonder if the free locomotion would affect that and improve that in any way. One thing I didn't like about the dash is that it's relative to your head and
Yeah.
not your body.
Right.
Whereas I want everything to be relative to my body in terms of motion in VR. And so you know what I mean is, like, if you're looking forward and you hit left, you go that way. But if you look to the left and go left, you kind of go backwards.
Yeah.
And so I was a little put off by that. I wanted the dash to be relative to where my feet were. On the other hand, I feel like we said a lot of negative things about this game. It's not that bad of a game.
No, it's not bad at all. It's a hard game, and I think it's an important game because it is built from the ground up for room scale, track motion control shooting, and it's not like a realistic military shooter, which we've seen a lot of in VR,
Right.
or a zombie shooter, slower paced zombie shooter, which we've seen a lot of in VR as well. It captures the feel of the look and feel of Doom. I just don't know if it takes full advantage of what VR presence has to offer.
I think it's the name. I think when you have Doom on the title of a game,
Yeah.
you're living up to greatness. And if it's not the killer app, you're not living up to expectations.
Right. Well, on the console side, this game is also being released on PSVR, where things get a little complicated there. Now, it's the exact same game in that it looks just as good. It's one of the better looking PSVR games, I think, out there. But there are 3 different ways to play this game on PSVR. You could use the motion controllers, the move motion controllers. You could use the DualShock controller, which some people have liked, which gives you actual smooth locomotion. In that case, use your head to track, to look around. Or you can use the PS Aim. This is the PlayStation PSVR peripheral that was released this past year with Farpoint. And not many games so far have been made that support the PS Aim controller, Doom being one of them. And we did a bit of a hands-on with Doom for PSVR where we weren't completely confident about its effectiveness. And I think that plays out in the full game, where it's weird that you're holding 2 hands with the PS Aim, but the game model shows one hand holding your gun. They didn't change that up at all, and the other hand just off to the side, ready to throw a grenade with your head look.
Yeah, I just remember the controls being very complicated.
They are. You would think it's simple. Doom, right? It's choose your gun, fire your weapon.
Right.
But because you're adding dash, you're adding teleport, you're adding a weapons wheel that you need to cycle through. Like the PS Aim has it's a lot of buttons on this, and I just want to go in and look like I'm holding an assault rifle, dash, or smooth locomotion and shoot. And
I felt like Farpoint did a good job of that. Maybe Doom had to fit all of the features that they had into this, and you also have the map and you have menus.
Right.
It's odd on the PC, on the menus, to navigate them. You actually need to use both controllers. Like this is enter and this is back up.
Yeah.
It should all just be on a D-pad.
I know.
It's strange. It's just like the user experience standpoint. This game on just about every controller just seems a little unfleshed out.
And that's been the case for almost all of Bethesda's VR games, from Skyrim to Fallout to Doom.
But you can understand with Skyrim and Fallout because they had to cram a PC game that was made for a keyboard into these controllers. They got to start from scratch with Doom.
Yes, they did, and I don't think they take enough advantage of gestures and motion and your awareness. Like you're looking, you're pointing, and you're pressing, half a dozen buttons just to engage in a firefight.
Yeah.
So that's Doom VFR. I still think if you have PSVR, it's worth $30. If you have the PS Aim, it's totally worth $30. Just for the experience. You're gonna get a lot of game out of that. I just don't think it's reached that holy grail of this is what a Doom-style shooter should feel like in VR.
Right, yeah. I mean, the game, you might also think it's very scary. Maybe you're not a fan of frightening games in general, and in VR, you just stay away from them. I actually didn't find this to be that frightening of a game. I mean, there certainly are. In fact, the scariest point happens probably in the first scene, where there's a pinky that runs straight at you, and, basically passes through your body. That was viscerally, exciting. But most of the game just is not that scary because you can teleport out of any situation.
Now, Doom, the most recent reboot of Doom, is a departure from Doom 3. And
Right.
Doom 3 BFG edition was what John Carmack had first ported with and messed around with. But that port has actually continued on. And there is a version of Doom BFG that can work with VR that I would say maybe you recommend that over Doom VFR.
In terms of being a VR experience, I do. From a personal standpoint, now this game is scary.
Yeah.
And
Doom 3 was a scary game. It was a horror game.
It was more of a horror game. You're right. Like you would carefully walk through dark corridors. You know, Carmack was very proud of Doom 3 because all the lights were real time, and so they couldn't afford to have that many of them. So that lends itself well to a haunted house kind of vibe where you have very dimly lit corridors and lots of dark shadows. And there are consequently many jump scares and, you know, things coming out of the shadows and coming towards you. And in VR, that is terrifying.
Now, I have a question mechanically, because I haven't played this yet.
Yeah.
But do they let you split the flashlight with the weapon?
They do.
They do. So one hand is a flashlight and one hand is the weapon.
Now, I can't say enough positive things about this mod from a technical standpoint.
That's
so
what I want.
This is the Doom BFG VR mod, and it is available on GitHub, and it's a really, really solid modification. So you buy Doom BFG straight up from Steam, and then you simply run this installer, and it installs an exe into the game folder. You run that, and it's in VR mode. There's no command line things. You don't have to do any kind of complicated things. And once you're in there, there's a huge menu of options. So it's almost the opposite of VFR, where you can't do smooth locomotion. That they've said this is how you play the game. With this mod, you're given the option of many, many different ways to play the game. So there is a teleportation, if you like, which it defaults to, but you can turn on smooth locomotion. You can control where the flashlight is mounted. Is it mounted to the weapon? Is it mounted on your hand? And I recommend your hand.
Of course.
Because it feels so natural.
Yes.
And
one hand looks around the flashlight, other hand's kind of holding the gun.
And it's absolutely, as I said, terrifying.
Oh, it's great.
It is. It is a great experience. It's just, you know, it's a game you're going to want to play with other people in the room.
Now, how about the graphics? How do they hold up? And how do like the getting up close to some of the? Because I remember Doom 3 had some really great like motion graphics in the display panels and some of the mechanics.
That was cool. Yeah, at the time it reminded you of Flash or something like that. Like they did a nice job with that, and it all works. You know, Doom 3 was made maybe almost 15 years ago now, but it's recent enough that it holds up, you know, enough. As we've seen from the beginning with VR, the quality of the graphics is not paramount. I mean, you can be in a world that is, you know, decades old in terms of the technology, and you feel like you're in that old world. Like you feel like you're there regardless. This game is just the same. The graphics are worse than VFR, unquestionably, but they're fine. They're good enough. And
runs well.
Runs fine.
And
runs
sound design.
Sound design holds up. I mean, that was a good part of that game. But I think more importantly, the smooth locomotion and the pacing and just it being more about the environment than I think VFR makes it a better VR experience. It's just much more immersive, and it's longer, it's for sure. And the number of options I think is an important aspect. I think going forward, VR is now old enough that there are so many people that want that more intense locomotion, or just the option of, for instance, where do you put the flashlight, that we're going to have those as, you know, defaults. Like game developers have to include options for the whole gamut of VR, and they can't just cater to the newbies anymore.
Right. So there you have it, a tale of two Dooms on this week's episode.
By the way, this new Doom,
Yeah.
first Doom ever made without Carmack or Romero, right?
Oh, milestones indeed.
Yeah.
Not all positive, but it's out there and you can play it now. Let us know your thoughts if you've been playing Doom VFR or the Doom BFG edition for VR in the comments below. And we'll be back next week with more VR talk. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.